How many of you remember the old Dennis the Menace cartoons? Remember Dennis the Menace with the old guy who lived next door, and in the paper they were always causing trouble, and the old man, and I cannot remember his name right now, but if you know, go ahead and put it in the comments. But the old man would always harass Dennis, and Dennis would always harass the old man. I think one of my favorite cartoon strips, besides him, always getting in trouble, was when Dennis would come over and the old man would ask him a tough question, like the day he had a yo-yo, and he said, "I see you have a yo-yo," and Dennis said, "No, it's not a yo-yo, it's just a yo. It will yo down, but it won't yo back up. It's just a yo." And I think of that relationship between the young and the old and how precious that relationship could be. But I also think that sometimes that old man is representative not just of the guy who lives next door who's generations older, but also of our leaders. And the relationship that older, seasoned, mature leaders have with new people who want to lead or new people who need to be led is a very tricky aspect. Today I want to talk about a really basic rule. If you don't like people, don't lead people. This is not one of John Maxwell's rules. It's one of my own. It's a brand new one, I think. It's probably not a new idea. A lot of people have experienced this reality, but that's what I want to talk about today on Leading Leaders. If you don't like people, don't lead people. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast. About a year and a half ago, we were blessed with new neighbors on one side of our house. And when they moved in, I had the opportunity to introduce myself, and I realized that the father is both almost completely blind. Apparently he sees light, he can move around based on that. But when you look him in the eye, his eyes are going somewhere else. And when he moves around, he's always touching something. I see him moving around the yard, helping his wife get in and out of the car. She, by the way, is in a wheelchair. He's also partially hard of hearing, and I don't know to what degree, but I do know if you knock on the door, you'll knock for several minutes before they'll come to the door. So Uber drivers and food delivery drivers and things of that nature often knock on my door to let me know that they have food for them. They've even left it on my doorstep in the past, and for the first couple of times I didn't know whose food it was. We kind of got the rhythm of that now. But they also have a son who's probably third or fourth grade. And for the most part, he's a good kid. He's a typical third or fourth grade boy. And so he does what third or fourth grade boys do. And I remember, it's been a month or two, a year, a decade. It's been a long time since I was a third grade boy. But I do remember raising my own third grade boys. And I do remember grandsons in that age. And we all did the same thing. If there was something there to be climbed on, we climbed on it. If we could tie something around it and jump off of it, we tied something around it and jumped off of it. If we could tie two things together, suddenly it was a fort. And if there was a fort, then every toy, every gizmo, every gadget, every invention we could come up with had to be in that fort. And, well, yeah, the third grade boy next door and all of his friends decided that the trees between his house and my house would be that fort. And at one point I found pillows and sleeping bags and stuffed animals in my yard, behind my air conditioner, shoved up against my air conditioner, homemade bows and arrows and rocks and things of that nature in the yard. And several times I had a conversation with them and I said, guys, look, I don't mind you playing here, just clean up your mess when you're done. If you're going to play here, don't kill my trees. I don't think that's a hard ask. Don't use my air conditioning unit as a launch pad for you to jump off of or launch rockets off of or shoot bow and arrows into. It's not made for any of that. It's no good for that, and it's no good for you to do that to it. And I think those are reasonable requests. But I also know that from the world of a third grade boy, that's a mean old man. That's a mean old man crouching around the corner waiting for us to accidentally have some fun just so we can pounce on it and make sure that it doesn't happen. I know that that's what it feels like as a third grade boy. And I also know that it's hard to build a relationship. When it's hard to build a relationship with their parents, it's hard to build a relationship with him. So this went on for several months. And when I say several months, I'm not exaggerating even a tiny bit. For several months, it was garbage. It was toys. It was things tied between their yard and ours through the trees. It was climbing into trees that are not big enough to be climbed upon. It was all of that and a bag of chips. Actually, several bags of chips, candy trash, wrappers, Coke cans, all up and down my yard. It would take me 30 minutes to prepare a 5-foot strip of lawn for me to mow it, because it would take that long to pick up the garbage, the toys, and the other stuff they left behind. I'm saying all this to make a very valid point, and that is there's a lot of clutter in relationships today, whether it's TikTok and other forms of social media, whether it's Facebook, it's propaganda, it's the news media, it's politics. It's the difference in what we learn in education. I would love to see two people with a PhD in politics, one who graduated 2 generations ago and one who graduated recently, compare notes on what they're learning in school. I'd love to see someone with a PhD in English or a PhD in education sit down and talk about what they've learned from experience versus what they learned in school, or what they were taught a generation ago versus what they're being taught now. I think there's a drastic difference in the basic level of information and education that's being given to our young people today. Part of that generational gap is just age, maturity, wisdom, and experience. Part of that generational gap is the worldview. As someone last night at an event asked me, should I really put a tip on the delivery before the drivers even left the store? I mean, don't I want to tip them based on their behavior when they get there? And I said, well, in our day, that was exactly right. When the server finished taking care of us, or the delivery driver, i.e. the pizza when I was in high school, when they showed up, if it was on time, if it was hot, if the pizza hadn't been dumped over, if we got all the pieces that we ordered, then yes, you tip them well. These days, it seems to be the other way around. If you don't put a tip on that ticket before they leave the shop, they're going to treat you poorly. You might not get the drinks you ordered, not on the first trip, and there won't be a second trip. If you don't tip them, they're not coming. Or they might come late, or they might put it on the front porch, ring the doorbell, and then leave because you didn't give them a tip. Why should they hang out? Anyway, they don't really care. And that mindset is a little different about how you're being tipped. Now let's take that whole thing into the realm of leadership. In the realm of leadership, we have relationship as the key element of leadership. Relationship is the only way that you have influence from one group of people to another, from one person to another. If there is no relationship, there is no influence. And if there is no influence, well, there is no leadership. That doesn't seem to be real complicated, but it does seem to be often missed. And that is my point. If you don't like people, it's going to be really hard to lead people. If the generational gap between you and the people that you're responsible for leading is a lot like myself and the 3rd grade boy who lives next door, and we just can't seem to get on the same page, then there's going to be challenges. Now, I have taken time intentionally to go out there and grab a football and play football with them or throw a frisbee around with them. My boys are up and gone, but if there's nobody to throw a football with these kids, then I'll go throw a football with these kids. I want to build a relationship that way. But I still have to be firm on the fact that I don't want you climbing on the side of my house, jumping off of my air conditioner, or hanging from my shrubs that you think is a tree. They're not made for that. Let's find another place to do that. Maybe we should all walk to the park together and go do that in the park where the trees are 400 years old and they're made to be climbed on. But that level of involvement, that willingness to kind of lay everything aside and ask, what is it that those that I lead, what is it they need? How can I come to the table where they are to meet the needs that they have? How can I meet the expectations they have? If we really did look, whether you're talking about social sciences or education or practical sciences, the STEM technology fields, if you were to look at those fields and ask yourself, what did I learn in my college degree versus what did they learn? It's going to be a different world. In addition to that, we also know that young people today have access to information. I did a little test last night while driving down the highway. I just spoke to my device and I said, how far is it to Mexico City? And it took about 20 seconds for my device to find that information and tell me exactly from where I was driving down the highway how far to Mexico City. And I turned to my wife and I said, Imagine if you were in high school in a classroom and somebody asked you that question, the number of steps that you would have had to go to. You would have had to get out of your chair, go find a map that included both where you were and Mexico City, measure it with a ruler to figure out how far it was in inches or centimeters, and then convert that based on the map's grid scale as to how many inches or centimeters are represented by how many miles. Then you'd have to do the math. And chances are, if you did find it in a book like an encyclopedia, from XYZ city to XYZ city, it's this many miles, you would have found that you're probably not going to get precise because maybe it only goes to the major cities. I mean, they can't list every city in Texas and Mexico City. So I've got to do some more math to figure out how far it is from the major city that they announced to where I actually am right now. That's a complicated process. It's a process, though, that my device does in 30 seconds. It's also a process that young people today who are being led presume that knowledge has always been that readily available. They presume that, well, why don't you know that? When they ask you a puzzling question. Sometimes it's just a gotcha question. They just want to know, do you know, or do you know how to figure it out? And you watch young people do things with devices, digital devices, phones, laptops, iPads, that are mind-numbing when you talk about the interaction with the app, how they talk to the apps, the things that they can turn on and turn off. When we try to lead people who have access to knowledge we don't have, what we find is that leadership is primarily not an education tool. Oh yeah, you got to have some education to do leadership well. You've got to be a constant learner to do leadership well. But leadership primarily is a soft skill, meaning it's a relationship role. If you don't have good relationship skills, no amount of education is going to make you a great leader. We've talked before about the sales manager who is a great sales rep and not a good sales manager. It happens in every category, every industry. There are those who are book smart about a topic, but they're not open thinkers. They're not willing to ask the tough questions of themselves, and they don't have the relational skills to be a good leader. I know people who are super smart. They have great educations, great experience in their fields, but they don't like people. They are the quintessential old man next door going, "Get off my lawn!" And that person is not going to be a good leader because they don't like people. If you're not willing to look at the kid who won't stay off your lawn and figure out how instead you're going to connect with them on their terms, rather than yelling, "Get off my lawn!" then you're not going to be a good leader. So I sum all that up to say, I think it's a good rule to understand that if you don't like people, don't lead people. Don't try to convince people to do what you want them to do if you're not a nice person. Find other ways to do that. Maybe you just pay someone to do the service, or you do it yourself. But if you don't like people, don't lead people. Leadership is a relationship. And without the relationship, there is no influence. Without the influence, there is no leadership. If you don't like people, don't lead people. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day.